So our last skill in our first learning unit on intermolecular forces and phase changes has to do with crystalline solids. You're actually going to spend a good bit of time in lab sort of practicing this, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time in lecture kind of going over things. But when we think about ionic substances, when we think about crystalline solids, we can think about something called the unit cell. So all ionic compounds exist as these crystalline solids where we have a very ordered arrangement of ions in what we define as a unit cell. And a unit cell is basically a repeating arrangement of these ions. So again, if we've got here, we've got green is going to be our chloride ions, and then we've got purple here as our sodium ions. We can see that we've got a whole bunch of these that kind of create this very large ordered arrangement of alternating cations and anions. When we think about just breaking this up into one repeating unit, that's what a unit cell is. This is what that unit cell looks like. Okay? So these unit cells come in different flavors depending on where we put the ions on this cube. You can put ions on the corners, okay? You can put them in the middle. That's what we call body-centered. You can put them on the face. And we don't have a picture here to show of this, but you can also have them on the edge as well. So it has to do with how all of these ions want to pack in on one another to make this very ordered crystal. Okay? I want you to remember the reality, even though we've shown this as a cube that has hard edges, these atoms are really spheres and they take up space to touch one another. You'll be able to see this very clearly when we do this in lab. You'll actually be able to build some of these from models, and it's really neat to be able to kind of put this in a tactile way. So what are the things that we need to be able to think about? Well, a lot of the problems that you're going to see relating to this skill is counting the number of ions or determining an empirical formula. Okay, so what we really need to do is identify where these atoms are. Are they corners? Are they edges? Are they faces? Or in the center? And depending on where they are determines how much of each of those a unit cell owns. So for example, if you are an ion that exists on the corner, you've got 8 different cubes that all own a little piece of that sphere, right? We can see this. This is 1/8 of a sphere that's there, okay? If you are in the center, you are owned 100% by that unit cell. If you are on the face, you own 1/2 of it. And we don't have a picture here of this, but if you are on the edge, you are going to be owned by 4 cells. Said another way, each unit cell owns 1/4 of it, okay? So this is information that you want to make sure that you have up here, okay? But I think if you see these pictures in your head, you'll be able to rationalize and understand. It's either 1, 2, 4, or 8 in terms of the number of unit cells that share that atom. All right, so how do we use this information? I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. We're going to practice these problems in class and then again in lab, but you'll see a picture that shows a unit cell. For example, this is a unit cell of sodium chloride. So you might see a question that asks you to tell me how many sodium cations are contained within one unit cell. Okay, so if I'm looking at this, I've got some edge pieces here. All right, so each one of these is 1/4. There are 12 edges on a cube. Okay, so I've got 12 edges times each edge owns 1/4 of a sodium cation. So we can go ahead and write this down here. I've got 12 edges times each edge owns 1/4 of that ion. That means I've got 3 sodium ions that are from my edge. Now, it's a little hard to see here. There's one that lives in the middle. And that would be sure to be made clear with some other pictures here. But we've got one that's in the middle. So we've got 1 chloride or sodium cation that's in the middle. I've got 4 sodium cations that are in this. Let's do the same thing with chloride. Okay? We've got chloride that's on the corners here. So I've got 8 corners. Each corner owns 1/8. So that's going to give me 1 chloride ion from my corners. And then I've got faces here. There are 6 faces to a cube. Each face has 1/2 of a chloride ion, so that gives me 3 chloride ions. So I have 4 total chloride ions that are in this unit cell. So again, you might see questions where you're asked to determine how many ions are present in a unit cell. There's 4 of each of these. You might be asked to determine, well, what's the empirical formula? If I've got a ratio of 4 sodiums to 4 chlorides, then the empirical formula, and you guys know this already, is NaCl. So a lot of what you might see here might be things that you can reinforce from previous knowledge, okay? But those are going to be the kinds of skills and questions that you'll see with regards to unit cells.